Arizona Territory, 1887. The Apache elders called her Chaita, the Cursed One. Born with eyes like winter sky and hair touched by fire, she was cast out from her tribe at 16, deemed a bearer of bad spirits. Now, 3 years later, she lived alone in the Red Canyon where even the coyotes feared to tread. What the elders didn't know was that their curse would become another man's blessing, and that blessing would ride into her life on a storm-black stallion with spurs that sang like silver bells that the morning sun painted the canyon walls crimson. When Ayanna first heard the horse's hooves echoing through the narrow passage, she pressed herself against the sandstone, her hunting knife steady in her grip. 3 years of solitude had taught her that visitors meant trouble, and trouble usually came with guns. The rider emerged from the shadows like something from a fever dream. Tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and hair the color of prairie wheat, he sat his black stallion with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, leather chaps worn smooth, a hat that had seen 1,000 sunsets, and boots that had walked through more dust than most men see in a lifetime. But it was his eyes that caught her breath, green as spring grass after rain. They held neither the hardness she expected from a white man nor the fear most showed when they glimpsed her unusual features. Instead, they carried something she hadn't seen in so long she'd almost forgotten what to call it. Kindness. "Easy there, miss," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of Texas. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Ayanna kept her blade ready but didn't retreat. "What brings you to the cursed canyon, cowboy?" He tilted his hat back, revealing more of that weathered face. "Name's Jeremiah Stone. Jerry to my friends, and I reckon I'm lost." He gestured toward the maze of red rock passages behind him. "Been riding since dawn, looking for the trail to Tucson. Horse threw a shoe back a ways, and we've been picking our way careful like ever since." She studied him with the wariness of a wild thing. His horse limped slightly on the left foreleg, and his water skin hung nearly flat against his saddle. If this was deception, it was masterfully done. "You're 20 miles from any trail to Tucson," she said, "and 30 from the nearest town." Jerry whistled low. "Well, that's a pickle. Don't suppose you know where a man might find water and maybe something to eat? I've got coin to pay." The offer of payment stirred something in Ayanna's memory, the way her grandmother used to say that generosity was the mark of a good heart. But 3 years of exile had taught her caution above all else. "There's a spring," she said finally, "half a mile up the canyon. Water's sweet and cold. Much obliged." He touched the brim of his hat. "Mind if I ask your name, miss?" "Seems only polite, seeing as you're helping a stranger." She hesitated. Her Apache name would mark her as surely as her strange coloring, but something in his manner made her want to trust. "Ayanna," she said softly. "That's a pretty name. Means eternal blossom, doesn't it?" Her eyes widened. Few white men knew Apache words. Fewer still cared to learn them. "You speak Apache?" "A little. Learned from a scout named Running Bear, back when I was riding with the cavalry." He saw her expression shift and raised a hand. "That was a long time ago, miss. Different life, different man." The weight of his words hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Ayanna knew about different lives, about becoming someone else when the world forced your hand. "The spring," she said, pointing up the canyon. "Follow the path between those two spires. You'll know it by the cottonwoods." Jerry gathered his reins, but didn't move. "Will I see you again?" The question caught her off guard. Most people who stumbled into her sanctuary couldn't leave fast enough. Once they got a good look at her, the Apache believed her mixed features, the pale eyes inherited from some long-forgotten ancestor, the unusual hair that caught fire in sunlight, marked her as cursed. White folks just saw another Indian to be feared or pitied. "Why would you want to?" she asked. His smile was gentle as spring rain. "Because you're the first person I've met in 3 states who looked at me like I might be worth talking to." Before she could respond, he clicked his tongue and guided his limping horse up the canyon trail, leaving Ayanna alone with questions she couldn't answer and a feeling she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. 3 days passed before Jerry Stone returned to her canyon. Ayanna had almost convinced herself she'd imagined the kindness in his eyes. That loneliness had finally driven her to see things that weren't there. But as the sun reached its peak on the third day, she heard those familiar hoof beats echoing off the canyon walls. This time he came bearing gifts, a string of trout fresh from some distant stream, coffee beans wrapped in oiled cloth, and a small bag of flour that smelled like civilization. "Figured I owed you for the directions," he said. Dismounting near the spring, where she'd been washing clothes, found a blacksmith in Willow Creek. "Got Thunder here properly shod." He patted his stallion's neck. "Road to Tucson was right where you said it'd be. You went to Tucson and came back." Ayanna couldn't hide her surprise. "Well, I got to thinking." Jerry pulled his hat off and ran fingers through his wheat-colored hair. "Been drifting for near on 5 years now, looking for something I couldn't name. Then I met you. And for the first time in all that wandering, I found myself wanting to stay put." The words hit her like a physical blow. She turned away, busying herself with the wet clothes draped over the rocks. "You don't know what you're saying. I know enough." His voice was closer now. She could feel him standing just behind her, close enough that she caught the scent of leather and honest sweat. "I know you're alone out here, and I know that's not natural for any creature God put on this earth. I know you've got sadness in your eyes that speaks to the sadness in mine. And I know that in 3 days of riding, I couldn't stop thinking about the way you looked at that sunset like it was the first one you'd ever seen." Ayanna's hands stilled on the wet fabric. "The Apache cast me out," she said quietly. "Called me cursed, said I brought bad spirits wherever I went. The Apache were wrong." The certainty in his voice made her turn. He stood hat in hand, his green eyes serious as church on Sunday. "How can you be so sure?" "Because in all my years of wandering, I've learned to recognize blessings when I see them. And you, Ayanna, are the finest blessing I've ever come across." The words hung in the desert air like prayers. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jerry stepped forward and gently touched her cheek, his calloused thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "Your eyes," he said softly, "they're the color of winter sky just before dawn. Most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Tears she'd held back for 3 years finally broke free. Jerry caught them with his thumbs, his touch as gentle as morning mist. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make me believe in things that can't be." "What can't be?" "That a drifting cowboy might find his home in a desert canyon. That a woman with eyes like winter sky might be exactly what his soul's been searching for." Before she could answer, he leaned down and kissed her forehead, soft as butterfly wings. "I'm not going anywhere, Ayanna. Not unless you tell me to." The days that followed felt like stepping into a dream Ayanna had never dared to have. Jerry made camp by the spring, his bedroll spread beneath the cottonwoods, his horse grazing in the sweet grass that grew near the water. He brought order to her solitary world without trying to change it, fitting into her routines like he'd always been their dot in the mornings. They hunted together. Jerry proved surprisingly skilled with bow and arrow, a talent he'd learned, he said, from the same Apache scout who'd taught him the language. They tracked deer through the narrow passages between canyon walls, moving as silent as shadows, communicating with gestures and glances that spoke louder than words. In the evenings, they sat by small fires that cast dancing shadows on the red rock walls. Jerry told stories of his wandering years, the cattle drives that stretched from Texas to Kansas, the towns where he'd worked as sheriff or deputy, the people he'd met and left behind. His voice carried the weight of loneliness, and Ayanna understood that his drifting hadn't been choice so much as necessity. A wounded soul seeking something it couldn't name. "What were you running from?" she asked one night as they watched stars emerge in the desert sky. Jerry was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried old pain like smoke from a dying fire. "Had a wife once," he said. "Pretty little thing named Elizabeth. Met her in Austin when I was just 22, fresh out of the army and full of dreams about settling down." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "We had a good life for a while. Little house with a garden, plans for children, Sunday dinners with her folks." He fell silent again, and Ayanna waited, sensing the weight of whatever came next. "Cholera took her," he said finally. "Whole town was dying. But I thought we'd make it through. I was strong. She was young." We had prayers and love and all the things you think might be enough. His laugh was bitter as alkali water. Wasn't enough. Lost her in 3 days. And buried her in ground so hard I had to pay extra to get the grave dug proper. Ayanna's heart clenched with sympathy. She'd known loss, but not the kind that comes with choosing to love and having that choice torn away after that. Jerry continued, I couldn't stay put anywhere. Every town looked like Austin. Every woman looked like Elizabeth. So I took to drifting, telling myself I was looking for work or adventure or some such nonsense. Truth was, I was running from the memory of what it felt like to have something worth staying for. He looked at her then, firelight dancing in his green eyes. Until I found you. The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Ayanna felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the walls she'd built around her heart. I'm not her, she said softly. No, Jerry agreed. You're not. Elizabeth was sunshine and laughter. Bright as a new penny. You're something different. You're sunset over the desert. Deep and mysterious and stronger than anything I've ever known. He reached across the space between them and touched her hand. I'm not trying to replace what I lost, Ayanna. I'm trying to find what I never knew I was looking for. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Ayanna fell asleep to the sound of another human breathing nearby. The loneliness that had been her constant companion loosened its grip just enough to let her dream of mornings that might not begin in solitude. 2 weeks into Jerry's stay, the peace of the canyon was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Ayanna woke before dawn to the echo of hoof beats and voices carrying through the narrow passages. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. Jerry, she shook him awake, her voice urgent but quiet. Someone's coming, more than one rider. He was alert instantly, the kind of instant wakefulness that came from years of sleeping with one ear open. How many? She listened, counting the different rhythms of hoof beats. 4, maybe 5. Moving fast but trying to be quiet about it. Jerry was already reaching for his gun belt. Could be anyone. Outlaws, maybe, looking for a place to hole up. But Ayanna's instincts told her different. The pattern of the approach, the way the riders moved through terrain, they clearly knew this wasn't random. This was deliberate. We need to get out of here, she said, rolling up her blankets with practiced efficiency. Not yet. Jerry's voice carried the authority of a man who'd worn a badge. If they're just passing through, running might draw attention we don't want. If they're here for a reason, he let the words hang unfinished. They didn't have to wait long to find out. As the sun painted the eastern rim of the canyon gold, 5 riders emerged from the narrow passage that led to the outside world. Even at a distance, Ayanna recognized the leader's profile, and her heart sank like a stone thrown in deep water. Daklugi, she whispered, using the Apache word for his name. Jerry glanced at her sharply. You know him. He was my cousin. One of the ones who voted to cast me out. Her hand found the knife at her belt. He's here for me. The riders approached slowly, hands visible but ready. Daklugi rode in front, a man of middle years with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. His 3 companions were younger, warriors she recognized from her childhood. The 5th rider made her breath catch, an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes like chips of flint. Grandmother, she breathed in Apache. Jerry heard the word and understood its significance, if not its meaning. Family, the medicine, woman, who declared me cursed. Ayanna's voice was steady, but Jerry could see the tension in the line of her shoulders. If she's here, this isn't just about bringing me back. The riders stopped 20 yards away. Daklugi dismounted and walked forward, his hands empty, but his posture radiating authority. Shaita, he called, using the name that meant cursed one. You will come with us. Ayanna stepped forward, Jerry close beside her. I was cast out. Cousin, I have no place among the people. The elders have reconsidered. Daklugi's eyes flicked to Jerry with obvious distaste. There are things you must answer for. What things? Jerry's voice carried the edge of a man ready for trouble. Daklugi's gaze settled on him with the weight of mountain stone. The white man speaks Apache. Some. Jerry replied in that language, his accent careful but understandable. Then you will understand when I tell you to leave. This is Apache business. Ayanna's business is my business, Jerry said, switching. Back to English. The old woman urged her horse forward then, her ancient voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Chaita, since you left us, the rains have failed, the hunting has grown poor. Children have been born sickly, and 2 of our elders have died of wasting sickness. Ayana felt the familiar weight of blame settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. The rains fail every few years, grandmother. The hunting is poor because the white men have driven away the buffalo and fenced the good grazing land. Perhaps, the old woman said, but you were cursed for a reason. Child, your strange eyes, your fire-touched hair, these are signs that you carry spirits not meant for this world. Now those spirits have been loosed to wander, bringing misfortune wherever they go. That's enough. Jerry stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. The lady's done nothing wrong, and she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. One of the younger warriors shifted in his saddle, his own hand moving toward his weapon. Daklugi raised a hand to stop him. You claim her. White man, I claim nothing, but I stand with her, if that's what you're asking, even knowing what she is, what she brings with her. Jerry's smile was sharp as a blade. I know what she is. She's the woman I love. As for what she brings, he glanced at Ayana. His green eyes warmed despite the danger. She brings everything good I've ever wanted in this world. The words hit Ayana like lightning strike. In all their days together, neither of them had spoken that word love. It hung in the desert air now like a banner unfurled, a declaration. That changed everything. Daklugi's expression darkened. Then you are as cursed as she. The spirits that follow her will destroy you as they have destroyed everything else she has touched. Let them try, Jerry said simply. The standoff stretched, taut as bowstring. 5 Apache warriors against 1 cowboy and the woman they'd come to claim. The odds were impossible, but Jerry had faced impossible odds before. What worried him wasn't the numbers, it was the pain he could see building in Ayana's eyes, the way she seemed to be folding inward like a flower touched by frost. You don't understand, she said quietly, speaking to Jerry but looking at her cousin. When bad things happen to the people, someone must be blamed. Someone must carry the weight of the tribe's misfortune, and you volunteered for that job? Jerry's voice carried gentle irony. I was born to it. She touched her unusual hair, her pale eyes. From the moment I drew breath, I was different. The medicine woman saw it, declared it, and the tribe believed. Believing don't make it true. Daklugi spoke then, his voice heavy with reluctant sympathy. Chaita, you were my father's brother's daughter. I took no pleasure in casting you out, but the signs were clear, and the medicine woman's wisdom is not questioned lightly. And now, Ayana asked, now the people suffer, and the elders remember that suffering began when we sent away the one who was meant to carry our burdens. The old woman urged her horse closer. There is a way, child, a ceremony that can contain the spirits you carry. Bind them so they cannot spread their influence. You would return to the people not as cursed one, but as guardian of our misfortunes, a scapegoat. Jerry said flatly, you want to make her a permanent scapegoat. A protector, Daklugi corrected, honored in her way, cared for, but apart, always apart. And if I refuse? Ayana's voice was steady as stone. The old woman's eyes grew cold as winter stars. Then the spirits remain loose, the misfortunes continue, and the blood of every child who dies of sickness, every elder who wastes away, every hunter who finds empty trails, all of it falls on your head. Ayana closed her eyes, and Jerry could see the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. This was the burden she'd carried since childhood, the terrible responsibility of being different in a world that demanded conformity. No, Jerry said. Every eye turned to him. He stood straighter, letting his hand rest openly on his gun now. I said no. She's not going back to a life of carrying blame that isn't hers. She's not going to be your ritual sacrifice to make the tribe feel better about problems that have nothing to do with her. You have no say in this, white man, Daklugi said. The hell I don't. Jerry's voice carried the authority of a man who'd faced down drunken cowboys and desperate outlaws. Ayana's a grown woman who's been making her own choices for 3 years. She gets to keep making them. He turned to her then, his green eyes steady and sure. You want to go with them. I won't stop you. but you go because you choose to, not because you're scared of what might happen if you don't. For a long moment, the canyon held its breath. Then Ayanna opened her eyes and looked at her cousin, her grandmother, the warriors who'd come to drag her back to a life of ritual suffering. I choose to stay, she said. The old woman's face darkened, like storm clouds gathering. Then the curse follows you, child. Whatever man stands with you, whatever place shelters you, whatever children you might bear, all of it will be touched by the spirits you carry. So be it, Ayanna said. Daklugi shook his head sadly. You were always stubborn, cousin. Even as a child, you questioned what should not be questioned. Maybe that's why the spirits chose me, Ayanna replied. Maybe they knew I was the only one strong enough to carry the weight of other people's fears. The Apache riders left as they had come, in silence that carried more menace than shouted threats. Jerry and Ayanna stood together by the spring, watching until the last horse disappeared into the maze of red rock passages. You know they'll be back, Jerry said finally. Yes, Ayanna's voice was calm, but he could see the tremor in her hands. If not them, then others. The curse has to be contained, according to their way of thinking. As long as I'm free, the people will blame me for every misfortune. Jerry turned to face her fully. Then we leave. Where would we go? I'm Apache in a world that doesn't want Apache. You're a drifter with a past you can't escape. What kind of life could we have? Any kind. We want. He reached for her hands, stilling their trembling with his touch. I told you I'd been looking for something I couldn't name. All those years of wandering. Now I know what it was. It was you. Not just any woman. Not just someone to fill the empty space Elizabeth left behind. You, Ayanna. The woman who looks at sunsets like they're miracles. Who can track a deer through stone. Who's strong enough to carry the weight of an entire tribe's fears, and still have room in her heart for kindness. Tears she'd been holding back broke free again. I'm cursed, Jerry. Everyone I've ever cared about has suffered for it. Look at me. His voice was gentle but firm. When she met his eyes, he smiled. Do I look cursed to you? Because I've got to tell you, these past 2 weeks have been the best of my life. If that's what comes from being cursed, then curse me proper, and let's get on with it. Despite everything, she almost smiled. You're impossible. I'm in love. He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing the tears on her cheeks. With a woman who's got eyes like winter sky and strength like the mountains. With someone who's been alone too long and deserves to know what it feels like to have a partner in all of life's adventures. Adventures, she repeated softly. Well, we're going to have to leave the canyon. Probably Arizona territory entirely. But I've got money saved from my wandering years. And there are places where a man and woman can start fresh without too many questions asked. What about your drifting? You said you couldn't stay put anywhere. Jerry's smile was warm as summer rain. That was before I found what I was looking for. Now I know home isn't a place, Ayanna. It's a person. And my home is wherever you are. The words hung between them like a bridge finally ready to be crossed. Ayanna looked into his green eyes and saw not the fear or pity she'd grown accustomed to, but something infinitely more precious: acceptance, complete, unconditional acceptance of everything she was, cursed or blessed or simply human. Where would we go? She asked. North, maybe. Colorado or Montana. Places where the past doesn't follow so close and the future's still got room for dreamers. He grinned. I hear there's good ranch land to be had, if a man's willing to work for it. You want to be a rancher? I want to build something lasting with the woman I love. Whether that's a ranch, a farm, a trading post, or just a little cabin by a stream where we can grow old together, I don't much care as long as you're there. Ayanna closed her eyes and let herself imagine a life where she wasn't the cursed one, where her unusual features were just part of who she was rather than signs of divine displeasure. A life where she woke up every morning to Jerry's smile and fell asleep every night to his voice telling stories by the fire. It seemed too good to be true. But then again, 3 weeks ago she'd been alone in a canyon, convinced she'd die as alone as she'd lived. Sometimes the impossible happened. Sometimes miracles wore cowboy boots and rode storm-black stallions. When do we leave? She asked. Jerry's answering kiss was soft as prayer and sure as sunrise. They spent the next 3 days preparing for a journey neither of them could fully imagine. Jerry rode to Willow Creek to sell his extra gear and buy supplies, returning with a sturdy pack, horse, and enough provisions to see them through to Colorado. Ayanna gathered her few possessions: her grandmother's turquoise necklace, her father's hunting knife, the bow she'd made herself from desert ironwood. It wasn't much to show for 19 years of life, but then again, she'd learned long ago that the most valuable things couldn't be packed on a horse's back. On their last evening in the canyon, they sat by the spring where they'd first shared coffee and stories. The cottonwoods whispered overhead, and stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. "Any regrets?" Jerry asked. Ayanna considered the question seriously. She thought of her childhood among the Apache, the games she'd played with children who later grew up to fear her. She thought of her mother, who died when Ayanna was 12, taking with her the last voice that had ever called her by a name that meant beloved instead of cursed. She thought of the aunts and cousins who'd once braided her hair and taught her to weave, who'd turned their backs when the medicine woman pronounced her judgment. "Yes," she said finally, "I regret that it took so long for you to find me." Jerry laughed, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "Well, I always was slow to catch on to the good things in life." They rode out before dawn, when the sky was still dark enough to hide their passage, but light enough to see the trail. Jerry led on his black stallion, Thunder, while Ayanna rode a sturdy paint mare they'd bought from a rancher near Willow Creek. The pack horse followed behind, loaded with everything they owned in the world. As they climbed out of the canyon that had been her home for 3 years, Ayanna looked back once. Red stone walls caught the first light of morning, glowing like embers in a dying fire. It had been a place of exile, but also of survival. A place where she'd learned to be alone without being broken by loneliness. Now it was part of her past, and the future stretched ahead like an open trail. "You okay?" Jerry asked, noticing her backward glance. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I'm ready." They rode north through country that grew greener and stranger with every mile. The desert gradually gave way to grassland, then to rolling hills dotted with pine trees. They avoided the larger towns, camping under stars and cooking over small fires that left no trace of their passing. Jerry proved to be everything he'd claimed and more. He knew the country like a book he'd read 100 times, finding water and shelter and safe passage through territory that might have swallowed a less experienced traveler. But more than that, he seemed to understand her need for quiet spaces, for time to adjust to the idea that she was no longer alone. 3 weeks into their journey, they crested a hill and looked down into a valley that took Ayanna's breath away. Green grass stretched as far as the eye could see, broken by a silver ribbon of river and dotted with clusters of aspen trees. Mountains rose blue and majestic in the distance, their peaks touched with snow that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. "Colorado," Jerry said, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "It's beautiful. And empty. Good land going begging, just waiting for someone willing to work it." He pointed toward a section of the valley where the river curved around. A natural meadow, that spot there, good water, good grass, sheltered from the worst weather. A man could build something there, something lasting. Ayanna looked where he pointed and felt something stir in her chest that she'd never experienced before, not just hope, but possibility. The sense that the future might hold something more than mere survival. "Our spot?" she asked. Jerry's smile was bright as the sun rising over the mountains. "Our spot." They filed their claim in the tiny town of Mountain View, a collection of buildings that seemed to have sprouted from the valley floor. Like wildflowers after rain, the land agent, a cheerful man named Morrison, barely glanced at Ayanna's unusual features. "In Colorado territory," he explained, "folks were too busy building their own lives to worry much about their neighbor's business. Long as you can work the land and pay your taxes, the territory's happy to have you," he said, stamping their papers with official authority. Jerry bought lumber and supplies while Ayanna explored the town. It was smaller than anything she'd ever seen, just a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of houses. But the people she met on the street nodded politely rather than staring or crossing themselves. One woman, the storekeeper's wife, even complimented her on the beautiful beadwork on her jacket. "Made it yourself?" the woman asked. "Yes, ma'am," Ayanna replied. "Well, if you ever want to sell any pieces, I'd be happy to display them in the store. We don't get much fancy handwork through here, and there's always folks willing to pay for quality." It was a small thing, but it felt momentous. Someone wanted to buy something she'd made. Someone saw value in her work rather than danger in her presence. That evening, as they camped by their river, Jerry produced a bottle of whiskey from his pack. "What's the occasion?" Ayanna asked. "Well," he said, suddenly looking younger than his 31 years, "I've been carrying this around for near on 6 months, waiting for the right moment to open it. And this is the right moment. This is the perfect moment." He pulled the cork and offered her the bottle. "To new beginnings." She took a sip, feeling the whiskey burn smooth and warm down her throat. "To new beginnings," she agreed. Jerry drank and then set the bottle aside. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his vest pocket. "Something I've been meaning to give you." He pulled out a small object wrapped in soft leather. When he unwrapped it, firelight caught the gleam of silver and turquoise, a ring, clearly made by skilled Apache hands, but sized for a woman's finger. It was Elizabeth's. He said quietly, "Her wedding ring. I've been carrying it ever since. She died, couldn't bring myself to sell it or give it away." He looked up at Ayanna, his green eyes serious. But holding onto it was just another way of staying stuck in the past. Time to let go of what was and reach for what could be. He held out the ring, and Ayanna could see the slight tremor in his hands. "Ayanna, I know we haven't known each other long by some folks' standards, but I also know that love isn't about time, it's about recognition. The minute I saw you in that canyon, I recognized you. Recognized that you were what I'd been searching for all those years without knowing it." He took a breath, gathering courage like a man about to jump across a wide creek. "Will you marry me? Will you help me build something lasting in this valley? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you were never cursed, you were always blessed? And now I'm blessed too, just by being with you." The ring caught firelight like a tiny star. Ayanna looked at it, then at the man holding it, then at the valley spread out around them like a promise of everything they could build together. "Yes," she said simply. Jerry's whoop of joy echoed off the mountains, and when he slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly. They were married 3 days later by the preacher in Mountain View, with Morrison and his wife standing as witnesses. Ayanna wore a dress she'd made herself from blue calico Jerry had bought at the general store, and Jerry wore his best shirt with a string tie that kept coming crooked no matter how many times he adjusted it. The ceremony was simple, just words, spoken over a worn Bible in a church that still smelled of new wood. But when Jerry took her hands and promised to love and honor her for the rest of his days, when she looked into his eyes and promised the same, Ayanna felt something settle into place in her heart, a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Jerry did, soft and sweet with sunlight streaming through the windows to bless them both. Afterward, Morrison's wife insisted on hosting a celebration dinner at the tiny hotel. It wasn't much beef, stew and cornbread, apple pie that was more tart than sweet, but it was the first wedding feast Ayanna had ever attended, let alone been the guest of honor at. To Jerry and Ayanna Stone, Morrison said, raising his glass of beer, "May your love grow stronger with every season." "To new beginnings," added his wife. "To found families," said the preacher. "To home," Jerry said, looking at his new wife with eyes full of wonder. "To home," Ayanna agreed. That night, in a room at the hotel that was just big enough for a bed and a washstand, Jerry and Ayanna began their life together as husband and wife. She'd expected awkwardness, perhaps even fear. She'd been alone so long, had never been touched with tenderness by anyone since her mother died. But Jerry's hands were gentle as rain on parched earth, and his kisses tasted like promises kept. When he whispered her name against her skin, it sounded like prayer, like thanksgiving, like everything beautiful she'd never dared hope for. The cabin they built that summer rose from the valley floor like something born from the earth itself. Jerry proved as skilled with hammer and saw as he was with rope and horse, and Ayanna's Apache training served them well when it came to understanding How a dwelling should sit on the land to catch winter's sun and summer breezes. By autumn, they had for solid walls a roof that didn't leak and windows that looked out over their meadow toward the mountains. Jerry had built a barn for Thunder and the other horses they'd acquired, and Ayanna had planted a garden that yielded more vegetables than two people could eat. "We'll need root cellar," she said one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "Planning ahead for winter?" Jerry asked, pulling her closer against his side. "Planning ahead for next year, and the year after that." She leaned into his warmth, still sometimes amazed that she had the right to do so. "Planning ahead for all the years we're going to have together. All of them," Jerry agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Every single blessed one." The first snow came early that year, dusting the valley white before November was half gone. Jerry and Ayanna settled into their cabin like bears preparing for hibernation, with stores of food and firewood laid by and nothing to do but enjoy each other's company. Through the long winter evenings, Jerry taught her to play cards and checkers. She taught him more Apache words and showed him how to make winter moccasins that would keep his feet warm even in the deepest snow. They read aloud from books Jerry had bought in town, adventure stories and poetry, accounts of travels to distant lands that made their own valley seem like the center of the world. "Listen to this," Jerry said one February evening, reading from a book about the California gold rush. The prospector spent 3 years searching for gold in streams that yielded nothing but pebbles and sand. Then one day, he looked up from his pan and saw his wife watching him from the bank and realized he'd been rich all along. "Pretty words," Ayanna said from her place by the fire, where she was working on a new shirt for Jerry. "True words," Jerry replied. "I spent 5 years wandering this country, looking for something I couldn't name. Turns out I was looking for you." She smiled, the expression transforming her face in the firelight. "And I spent 3 years alone, in a canyon, thinking I was cursed to live without human companionship. Turns out I was just waiting for me, for home," she said. Same thing. Spring brought visitors to their valley, not the kind Ayanna had learned to fear, but neighbors from the scattered ranches and homesteads that dotted the territory. Word had spread about the couple by the river, and folks were curious about the woman with the unusual eyes and the cowboy who'd settled down to ranch life. The first to come calling were the Hendersons, a family with 3 children who'd claimed land about 10 miles north. Mrs. Henderson was a practical woman who cared more about Ayanna's skill with herbs and healing than her mixed heritage. "Heard you know something about doctoring," she said without preamble, accepting a cup of coffee in Ayanna's kitchen. "My youngest has been coughing something fierce all winter, and the nearest real doctor is 3 days' ride." Ayanna had learned healing from her Apache grandmother, knowledge that had kept her alive during her years of exile. She examined the Henderson boy and recognized the signs of lung congestion that could turn dangerous if left untreated. "I can help," she said, "but you'll need to bring him here every few days so I can check his progress." Within a month, young Billy Henderson was breathing clear and running around like any healthy 8-year-old. Word of Ayanna's healing skill spread through the valley like wildfire, and soon people were riding from 50 miles away to consult with the lady doctor by the river. Jerry watched with pride as his wife found her place in their new community. She never charged money for her healing work, accepting payment in trade goods or simply the satisfaction of helping someone in need. The Apache had cast her out for being different, but here in Colorado, different meant valuable. "You're building something here," he told her one evening after she'd spent the day treating a rancher's infected wound. "Something important. We're building something," she corrected. "This is our life, Jerry. Our community. Our home." And it was true. Jerry had found his own role in the valley's growing network of neighbors and friends. His years of experience with horses and cattle made him invaluable to the ranchers who were still learning their trade, and his past as a lawman came in handy when disputes needed settling or when occasional trouble drifted through the territory. More than that, Jerry and Ayanna had become the couple others looked to as an example of what marriage could be. They worked together like two parts of the same machine, supporting each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. Their love was quiet and steady as the river that ran past their door, but it warmed everyone who came near it. The second year brought challenges that tested everything they'd built together. A harsh winter killed half their cattle, and spring brought floods that washed out their garden and damaged their barn. Jerry broke his leg in 3 places when his horse stepped in a gopher hole, leaving him laid up for months while Ayanna struggled to manage the ranch alone. But neighbors rallied around them the way family should. The Hendersons sent their oldest boy to help with chores. Other ranchers donated cattle to rebuild their herd. Mrs. Morrison organized the women of Mountain View to preserve vegetables. For Ayanna's medicinal work, this is what community looks like. Jerry said one evening as he watched Ayanna bandage the arm of a neighbor who'd cut himself on barbed wire. His leg was still in splints, but he could sit on the porch and receive the steady stream of people who came seeking Ayanna's help. "Is it what you expected when we decided to settle here?" she asked. Jerry considered the question seriously. "I expected land and cattle, and maybe a few neighbors to trade work with. I didn't expect to find family, even though we're not blood kin to any of them." "Blood doesn't make family," Jerry said. "Choice does. Love does. Showing up when times get hard does." He gestured toward the valleys spread out below them, dotted with the lights of distant homesteads. "Every one of those lights represents someone who's chosen to be part of what we're building here." Ayanna followed his gaze, thinking of the families she'd come to know and care about. The Hendersons with their boisterous children, old Pete Larson, the bachelor rancher who came for Sunday dinner every week because he had no family of his own, the Morrison family from town who'd become genuine friends rather than just business acquaintances. The Apache believe that everyone has a purpose, she said quietly, a reason they were born, a gift they're meant to give to the world. "What's your purpose?" Jerry asked. She was quiet for a long moment, thinking of the healing she'd done, the lives she'd touched, the community that had grown up around their little homestead. "I think," she said finally, "I was meant to show people that different doesn't mean dangerous, that the things that make us strange might be the very things that make us valuable." Jerry reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "And what's my purpose? To love me," she said simply, "to show me what home feels like, to prove that some curses are actually blessings in disguise." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead, listening to the river run past their door and the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. It was a peaceful sound, the sound of life being lived fully and well. The third year brought the greatest test of all. Ayanna was working in her garden one morning when she spotted riders approaching from the south, 5 figures moving with the purposeful rhythm. She remembered from her nightmares. Apache. Jerry was in town getting supplies, wouldn't be back until evening. Ayanna stood alone in her garden, watching her past ride toward the life she'd built with such careful hope. But as the riders drew closer, she realized these weren't the same men who'd come to her canyon 3 years ago. The leader was younger, his face unfamiliar. When he dismounted and approached, his manner held respect rather than condemnation. "Ayanna," he said, using her real name rather than the word that meant cursed. "I am called Nalnish. I bring word from the people." She set down her hoe but kept her hands visible and steady. "What word?" "The old medicine woman is dead, died last winter of the wasting sickness she said you brought upon us." His expression was carefully neutral. "With her death, some among the people have begun to question the wisdom of casting you out." Ayanna felt something shift in her chest, not hope, exactly, but a loosening of old pain. "And the others, Daklugi still leads those who believe in the old ways. But there are younger voices now, people who remember that you were skilled in healing, that your hands brought comfort as often as they supposedly brought curse. Why have you come?" Nalnish glanced around the homestead, taking in the solid cabin, the thriving garden, the prosperous look of everything Ayanna and Jerry had built together. "To offer you a choice," he said. "Return to the people, not as the cursed one, but as a healer. Take your place among us with honor restored." For a moment, Ayanna let herself imagine it returning to the tribe of her birth, being welcomed back into the community she'd been raised in, having her heritage acknowledged, her skills valued by her own people. Then she thought of Jerry, who would be riding home this evening expecting to find her waiting with dinner. and stories of her day. She thought of the neighbors who depended on her healing skills, the community that had embraced her not despite her differences, but because of them. "I am honored by the offer," she said formally, "but my place is here now." Nalnish nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "The white man you married, he treats you well. He loves me," Ayanna said simply, "completely and without reservation, and you love him with all my heart." The young Apache was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the afternoon light. "You look different," he said finally, "not the way you looked when you lived among us. There's peace in your eyes now. Contentment." "There is," she agreed. "Then perhaps," Nalnish said slowly, "the spirits that guided you away from us knew something we did not. Perhaps they knew where you belonged better than we did." He remounted his horse and gathered his reins. "If you ever change your mind, if the white world grows tired of you or cruel, know that there is a place among the people for Ayanna the healer." "Thank you," she said, "but I am home." She watched them ride away, 5 figures growing smaller against the vast Colorado sky. When Jerry returned that evening, he found her sitting on their porch, hands folded in her lap, face turned toward the mountains. "Everything all right?" he asked, settling beside her. "The Apache came," she said. Jerry's body tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. "Are you hurt?" "Did they offered to take me back," Ayanna interrupted gently. "Full honors, respected place as a healer among my birth people." Jerry went very still, and she turned to look at him, this man who'd ridden into her life like salvation on horseback, who'd loved her completely and built a life with her that was everything she'd never dared dream of. "I told them I was already home." The smile that spread across Jerry's face was brighter than sunrise over the mountains. He pulled her close, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart beating against her cheek. "Home," he murmured into her hair, "always and forever. Home." 10 years later, Ayanna Stone stood in her garden on a morning that promised to be as perfect as any god had ever made, watching her 8-year-old son chase butterflies between the rows of corn. Little Thomas had Jerry's green eyes and wheat-colored hair, but he'd inherited her quick hands and love of growing things. "Mama," he called, "look what I found." He held up a smooth river stone, worn round by years of water and weather. It was nothing special, just the kind of rock that could be found by the thousands along their stretch of river. But in Thomas's eyes, it was treasure. "Very nice," she said seriously, accepting the stone and turning it over in her palm. "This would be perfect for the medicine bag I'm making for Mrs. Patterson's new baby." Thomas beamed with pride, and Ayanna felt her heart swell with the familiar miracle of motherhood. After years of being told she was cursed, of believing she might bring misfortune to anyone she loved, she'd been blessed with not just Thomas, but also 5-year-old Mary, who was napping in the cabin, and the new baby growing beneath her heart. "Jerry Stone, you get down from that roof right now before you break your fool neck," she called to her husband, who was replacing shingles despite being 41 years old and having no business scrambling around on steep surfaces. "Just finishing up," Jerry called back, but he climbed down with the careful movements of a man who'd learned to listen to his wife's concerns. "The roof will keep another day," Ayanna said as he reached the ground. "But I only have one husband, and I'd like to keep him in one piece." Jerry grinned and kissed her cheek, leaving a smudge of tar behind. "Yes, ma'am. Anything else you'd like me to avoid doing today?" "You could avoid being so charming," she said, wiping the tar away with her apron. "It's very distracting when I'm trying to be stern with you." "I'll work on that," Jerry promised solemnly, then spoiled the effect by winking at Thomas, who giggled. A rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at an easy lope. Visitors were common now their homestead had become an unofficial way station for travelers, and Ayanna's reputation as a healer drew people from hundreds of miles away. But as the rider drew closer, Ayanna felt a familiar prickle of recognition. The set of the shoulders, the way the man sat his horse. She'd seen this rider before. "Morrison," Jerry said, shading his eyes against the sun. "Wonder what brings him out here on a Tuesday." But when the rider reached their gate, it wasn't Morrison at all. It was a stranger, a young man with the sun-weathered look of someone who spent his life in the saddle. He dismounted and approached with his hat in his hands. Mrs. Stone, Mr. Stone." His voice carried the accent of someone raised far from Colorado. "My name's Daniel Whitehorse. I've ridden a long way to find you." Ayanna felt Jerry tense beside her. The name Whitehorse was Apache, but this young man's features spoke of mixed heritage, Apache and white, like her own. "What can we do for you, son?" Jerry asked carefully. Daniel's eyes found Ayanna's, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch recognition, hope, and something that might have been family resemblance. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I think you might be my aunt." The words hung in the summer air like smoke from a distant fire. Ayanna felt the world tilt slightly, the way it had that day Jerry first rode into her canyon, the way it had when she'd first held Thomas in her arms. "Your aunt," she managed. "My mother was called Itzel. She died when I was small. But before she passed, she told me about her sister, the one with eyes like winter sky and hair touched by fire, the one the people cast out for being different." Daniel's voice was steady, but she could hear the emotion underneath. "She said if I ever needed family, if I ever needed a place to belong, I should find the sister who'd learned to make her own tribe." Tears blurred Ayanna's vision. Itzel, her younger sister, barely 14 when Ayanna had been banished. She'd wondered about her over the years, hoped she'd found happiness, prayed she'd escape the fate of being different in a world that demanded conformity. "Itzel," she whispered. "My little sister. She spoke of you often," Daniel said. "Said you were the strongest person she ever knew. Said you taught her that being different wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something to be proud of." Jerry stepped forward, extending his hand to the young man. "Daniel Whitehorse, you're welcome in our home for as long as you want to stay." "Thank you, sir." Daniel shook Jerry's hand, then looked back at Ayanna. "I don't want to impose. I wanted to meet the woman my mother told stories about. The aunt who proved that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who choose to love you." Thomas, who'd been listening with the rapt attention children give to anything that might affect their world, tugged on Ayanna's skirt. "Mama," he said, "is he really our family?" Ayanna looked down at her son, then at Jerry, then at this young man who'd ridden across half the continent to find the aunt he'd never met. She thought of the community they'd built in this valley, the neighbors who'd become family, the children she'd helped bring into the world, and the people she'd healed with her hands. And her heart she thought of the Apache elders who'd called her cursed and cast her out, never understanding that what they saw as weakness was actually strength. What they'd feared as dangerous was actually precious. "He is," she said, gathering Thomas into her arms. "Family isn't just the people you're born to, sweetheart. It's the people who choose to love you, and the people you choose to love back." She looked at Daniel, this nephew she'd never known she had, and felt her heart expand to make room for one more person to love. "You're not imposing," she said firmly. "You're coming home." Epilogue. The valley had grown in the 25 years since Jerry Stone first looked down from that hill and saw his future spread out in green grass and silver water. What had once been empty prairie now held dozens of homesteads, a proper town with a school and a doctor's office, and enough people to support a newspaper and a traveling preacher who came through every month. But the heart of it all was still the stone homestead by the river, where Ayanna tended her garden and her patients, where Jerry raised horses that were sought after from Colorado to California, where their children grew up knowing they were loved without reservation. Thomas had married the Henderson girl and built his own cabin just upstream from his parents. Mary had become a teacher in the new school, finding her calling in helping children learn to read and write. The youngest, little Sarah, was apprenticing in her mother's healing work, showing the same gift for easing pain and mending what was broken. Daniel Whitehorse had stayed, becoming the son Jerry and Ayanna had never expected but always needed. He'd married a woman from town and built his own horse breeding operation, specializing in the quick, sturdy mounts that were perfect for the rocky terrain of Colorado territory. And through it all, Jerry and Ayanna had grown older together like two trees planted side by side, their roots intertwining deeper with each passing season. "Remember when you told me you were cursed?" Jerry asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become as familiar as their own faces. Ayanna laughed, the sound as warm and rich as it had been 30 years ago when he first heard it echoing through a desert canyon. I remember a lot of things. Which particular memory are you thinking of? The day we met. You were so certain you brought bad luck to everyone around you. I was young and foolish, she said, settling more comfortably into the chair he'd built for her arthritis. I believed what other people told me about myself instead of deciding for myself what I was worth. And now, she looked out over the valley that had become her world, the lights of her children's homes, the gardens that fed half the territory, the roads that brought travelers seeking her healing touch from hundreds of miles away. She thought of the lives she'd touched, the community she'd helped build, the love she'd shared and received. Now I know better, she said. I wasn't cursed. I was just waiting for the right cowboy to ride into my life and show me what blessed really looks like. Jerry reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. Best mistake I ever made, getting lost in that canyon. Who says it was a mistake? Ayanna asked, smiling. Maybe it was just the spirits you don't believe in, making sure you ended up exactly where you needed to be. The last light faded from the mountains, and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, and the river ran past their door with the same steady murmur it had carried for all the years of their marriage. Home, Jerry said softly, and it wasn't a question. Home, Ayanna agreed. And in the desert canyon where they'd first met, where her story of exile had ended and their story of love had begun. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods like a blessing, carrying the echoes of laughter and the promise that some curses are just love waiting to be recognized. Now that you've watched the full story, we'd really appreciate it if you could rate it out of 10 in the comments. Your thoughts help us improve and ensure we're bringing you the kind of storytelling you truly enjoy.